It was once said that to rule Rome was to rule the world. Absolute power at your fingertips, legions at your command, your name carved into history for centuries. Yet for Rome's emperors, all that glory came with a brutal catch. A relentless gauntlet of usurpers, assassins, scandals, and peril lurking around just about every corner. Today we're taking an express trip through history, covering every emperor from the Roman Empire's dawn in 27 BC to the Western Empire's fall in 476 AD. Fair warning, imperial legitimacy can kind of be a mess at times, especially during chaotic eras like the crisis of the 3rd century or during and after the Tetrarchy. So some claims are wobbly at best. So I might have missed one along the way or slipped in a pretender. Let me know in the comments, I'd love your feedback. Alright, no more delays, we've got 500 years of history to cover in about 80 emperors. Let's dive right in. Augustus. The first emperor of Rome would use his adoptive father Julius Caesar's legacy and inheritance to carry Rome to new heights, ushering in the totally peaceful, no problems at all Pax Romana, Rome's golden age, which in reality still involved plenty of bloodshed, political power plays, and the occasional strategic purge of one's enemies. A master of propaganda, he transformed Rome's crumbling republic into a well-oiled imperial machine. All the while, pretending he totally wasn't a king at all. In fact, he never once referred to himself as emperor, simply first citizen. His reign can perhaps be summed up by his final words: "I found Rome a city of clay, and I leave it to you a city of marble." Tiberius, the gloomy stepson of Augustus, Tiberius reluctantly took the throne after a successful career as a savvy military general. Once he became emperor, he largely managed to keep the empire on track. However, as time went on, he morphed into an old conspiracy theorist recluse who inflicted terror on Rome's elite while ruling from his alleged Epstein-like island of Capri until his eventual death, either by natural causes or at the hands of his grandnephew, Caligula, who apparently may have smothered him to death with a pillow. Caligula. The son of Germanicus, Rome's most revered general, the boy known as Little Boots, Caligula is arguably the Roman Empire's most notorious despot, who turned the imperial palace into his own playground of debauchery. His reign mixed a jaw-dropping amount of cruelty with absurd antics. Rumor has it he even considered giving his horse the consulship in an effort to belittle the senators, whose wives he was busy sleeping with, making him a prime example of an emperor so unpredictable that his chaotic 4-year reign goes down in history as one of the most unforgettable. He even declared war on the sea itself, hoping to gain a triumph over the god Neptune. Inevitably, it didn't turn out too well for old Caligula, and he was butchered by his own guards. Claudius. While Caligula was getting butchered by the Praetorian Guard one room over, Claudius hid behind the curtains, waiting his inevitable fate. Little did he know, mere moments later, he would be declared the emperor. Often dismissed as a bumbling, crippled black sheep of the Julian Claudian dynasty due to his stutter and bow-legged gait, Claudius surprisingly made a pretty decent emperor, turning his awkwardness into administrative genius. Not only did he reform Rome's tangled bureaucracy, but he also expanded the empire, conquering the lands of southern Britain, all while quietly outsmarting those who doubted him, proving that underdog status can be a royal asset. Well, that is at least until he ate a bad batch of mushrooms, perhaps laced by his wife, who was also his cousin, whom he had changed the law so he could marry her. Guess that move really didn't work out for him. Nero, the final emperor of the Julian Claudian dynasty and Rome's resident red-headed thespian-turned-emperor, loved the spotlight so much he practically turned the empire into his own chaotic stage, from killing his own mother and wife to Rome burning down under his watch. Nero's Rome was no stranger to the tragically dramatic, just as poor old Sporus. Nero's grand finale was as dramatic as his reign, when rebellions erupted and the Senate declared him a public enemy. He opted to take the easy way out, with a little help from a slave, as he proclaimed, "Oh, what an artist dies with me." Not only would it be his death, but it would be the death of the Julian Claudian dynasty, ushering in a chaotic year of 4 emperors. Galba. The man who seized power in the chaotic wake of Nero's downfall tried to restore discipline with an iron, yet notably frugal fist. Unfortunately, his penny-pinching ways alienated the legions, and in short, his reign ended with a swift and bloody exit, proving that in Rome, you really do have to pay to play. Otho. The second of 69 AD's emperors, Otho was another flash-in-the-pan emperor, a pretty boy who basically bribed his way to the throne after masterminding Galba's assassination. However, he quickly found himself on the losing end of a battle against his successor, so naturally he stabbed himself to death within 3 months of becoming Rome's top dog. Vitellius. Next up to bat was Emperor Vitellius, who was both literally large and in charge, as he treated the throne like an all-you-can-eat buffet. His reign was a whirlwind of overindulgence and decadent feasting, hardly the mark for a steady ruler, and his appetite for excess quickly led to his downfall, when this fat foodie was dragged through the streets of Rome by an angry mob after 8 months of being the big man on campus. Guess he shouldn't have hogged all the food. Vespasian. The man who finally emerged victorious from the year of the 4 emperors was Vespasian, a practical, no-nonsense ruler who restored stability to Rome. Despite being a strict ruler, he wasn't above a good laugh, with his famous quip, "Money doesn't stink," after he defended his unconventional tax on public urinals, mixing physical pragmatism with a dash of cheeky humor. His steady leadership not only rebalanced the empire's finances, but also laid the groundwork for the Flavian dynasty's reign, as well as the Colosseum. Even in the face of death, he didn't pass up the opportunity for a joke. With his final words, "I think I'm becoming a god." Titus. The son of Vespasian and decorated general who pacified the Holy Land, Emperor Titus was a crowd favorite. He balanced disaster relief with grand spectacles in his brief yet memorable reign. Amid opening the Flavian Amphitheater, also known as the Colosseum, to the masses of Rome, and managing the aftermath of the Vesuvian eruption and yet another great fire of Rome, he proved that even in a short stint on the throne, one could leave a lasting legacy. Domitian. The iron-fisted final Flavian. Domitian ran Rome like a strict, paranoid headmaster with no room for misbehavior, Christians, or unruly senators. His grand building projects were rivaled only by his relentless surveillance of anyone daring to disagree with his rule. Though his efficient reforms improved the empire's infrastructure, his despotic streak left the Senate eager to erase his memory once they had turned him into a human pincushion. Nerva. The first of the so-called 5 good emperors, Nerva was the grandpa peacemaker emperor Rome didn't know it needed. Taking the throne at age 66, Nerva brought a much-needed chill vibe after Domitian's paranoid-fueled reign. His main achievement? Establishing the precedent of adopting an heir who wasn't part of one's biological family, as well as avoiding assassination by the uppity Praetorian Guard. Impressively, he actually died of natural causes, something his predecessor couldn't manage. Trajan. Rome's golden boy, Trajan took the empire to its biggest size ever, and made conquering look easy. Loved by the army and the people, he balanced battlefield glory with massive public works, proving that you can expand both borders and aqueducts at the same time. If there were an Emperor Hall of Fame, he'd be a first ballot inductee. Hadrian. The emperor who swapped conquest for consolidation. Hadrian spent his reign touring the empire, kinda like a promiscuous co-ed study abroad student, making sure Rome's borders were secure, but while also having a good time. Most famously, he built Hadrian's Wall in Britain. But Hadrian's first love was Greece, Greek culture, Greek architecture, and yes, Greek men. He left behind grand monuments and a well-fortified empire, proving that sometimes defense is the best offense. And finally, he was the first emperor to ever be fully bearded, setting a trend going forward. Antoninus Pius. The least remembered of the 5 good emperors, Antoninus ruled Rome with stability, diplomacy, and with a complete lack of military experience. Some contemporaries say he never went within 500 miles of a legion, let alone commanded one. His reign was so peaceful that he's kind of completely brushed over sometimes, despite his long reign. Yet his sound administration and savvy art of the deal financial legal reforms kept the empire running smoothly, proving that Rome is perhaps better off in the hands of a peacemaker. But that wouldn't be very Roman now, would it? Marcus Aurelius. The poster boy for Stoic philosopher kings, Marcus Aurelius spent his reign juggling writing his meditations and commanding brutal frontier wars. While he much rather have preferred writing about virtue and reason, fate had other plans, forcing him to spend years on the front lines defending Rome from invading barbarians. His reign showed that true grit shines when a thinker straps on armor and faces the chaos head on. If there's one fault on Marcus Aurelius, it's that he probably should have spent a bit more time teaching his son some of these lessons. Lucius Varus, the often forgotten co-emperor of Marcus Aurelius. Lucius Varus was more of a frat party guy than a battlefield general, and certainly not a Stoic philosopher like his counterpart. While he technically led Rome in its war against the Parthians, he mostly left the fighting to his generals, while he enjoyed the finer things in life. I guess he figured he was better off letting the professionals handle things while he kicked back and sipped wine. Commodus, Marcus Aurelius's wild card son, and Joaquin Phoenix's best role. Commodus basically torched the whole good emperor legacy. Fighting in the arena as a gladiator is one thing, but renaming Rome to Colonia Commandia is crossing a line. And yeah, the movie is pretty spot on. The guy was a pretty big POS, executing senators on whims, and basically spiraling into a series of paranoid, cruel acts, killing kin and rivals alike. A far cry from his philosopher dad. He flaunted power with bloody showmanship, until thankfully his wrestling coach of all people strangled him to death in the bathtub, ending his 12-year mess of a reign that ended Rome's golden age. Pertinax. The son of a former slave, this low-born soldier turned emperor is a real underdog story of a man making his way from zero to hero, just to be executed by his own guards after he cut their pay 3 months into his reign. Once again, if you don't pay, you can't play. Didius Julianus. Following Commodus's death and the chaos that followed, the empire was really up for anything, and Didius Julianus thought, why not just buy the throne, at auction of all things? And he ended up learning the hard way that money can't buy loyalty. After outbidding everyone for the throne, he lasted a mere 66 days before the army and the Senate decided they wanted a refund, via decapitation. Persenius Niger. One of the many contenders in Rome's chaotic year of the Five Emperors, Persenius controlled the east, but quickly found himself outmatched by Septimius Severus after losing a decisive battle. He fled, but was captured and executed. His short-lived reign proved that losing a Roman civil war meant losing your head literally. Claudius Albinus. Originally a would-be ally of Septimius Severus, Claudius ruled Britain and Gaul before Severus decided that he was more of a threat than a friend. After years of tension, they finally clashed, and Claudius lost the battle and his life. Severus had his body trampled by horses and his head sent back to Rome, because nothing says, I'm the rightful emperor, like displaying your rival's skull. Septimius Severus. The aforementioned African-born battle-hard emperor who fought his way to the throne, Septimius Severus ruled with a mix of military muscle and political cunning. A real soldier's general, famous for telling his sons, enrich the soldiers, scorn all others. He practically turned Rome into a military monarchy, proving that if you keep the legions happy, you can get away with almost anything. Well, at least until he dropped dead from sickness while expanding Rome's borders in Britain. Caracalla. The eldest of Septimius Severus' sons, Caracalla, the emperor who thought giving everyone Roman citizenship would make them forget he was a bit of a bloodthirsty tyrant. He is best known for his colossal baths and even bigger temper. His rule was a mix of brutal purges, high taxes, military campaigns, and spending an odd amount of time bathing with his political enemies, until his own bodyguards gave him an early and permanent retirement with their daggers. Geta. Caracalla's younger brother Geta, the emperor who barely got a chance to rule, spent most of his short co-reign dodging assassination attempts from his own brother. Spoiler alert, he didn't dodge the last one, as Caracalla had him murdered in their own mother's arms, then attempted to practically axe Geta's name from the history books with a process called Damnatio Memoriam, or Damnation of Memory, basically the ancient Roman version of hitting the permanent delete button, which I suppose didn't really work at all since I'm talking about him right now, but still something a good brother tends not to do. Then again, Romans don't have the best track record when it comes to brotherly love. Macrinus. So if you've seen the sequel that never should have been made, Gladiator II, you'll be somewhat familiar with the heavily fictionalized version of Macrinus, played by Denzel Washington. What the film leaves out is that Macrinus actually becomes emperor after climbing the Roman corporate ladder and orchestrating the assassination of Caracalla, becoming the first non-senatorial Roman to take the throne. A career bureaucrat with zero battlefield experience, he tried to cut soldiers' pay. A fatal mistake. An obvious one at that. The legions predictably were fuming at the bit, so much so that they opted to swap him out for a cross-dressing teenager, sending Macrinus on a one-way trip to an early grave. Elagabalus. The aforementioned cross-dressing teenager, Elagabalus took the throne at just 14 and promptly turned Rome into his own deranged version of Fear Factor. His reign was a fever dream of bizarre religious rituals, including attempting to make himself a sun god, marrying a literal meteorite, and scandalizing Rome by trying to wed a Vestal virgin. A major no-no. His banquets were just as unhinged. Tigers and lions were let loose mid-feast. Guests were served meals of wax and stone. And the whole empire became his personal circus, more obsessed with fashion and scandal than actual governance. He became such an annoyance to literally everyone that his own grandmother decided enough was enough, ordering his execution, where he was reportedly drowned to death in a toilet by his own Praetorian guards. Talk about a crappy way to go. Severus Alexander. The emperor who tried to clean up the mess left by his unhinged predecessor. Severus Alexander was a total mama's boy, and definitely not a stoic imperial military man. Dominated by his mother Julia Mamia's influence, she basically ran the empire, while he focused on minor diplomacy and financial reforms. But when he tried bribing invading Germanic tribes instead of fighting them, his own soldiers were so outraged at this diplomatic effort, they stabbed him and his mom to death, because in Rome, kindness was definitely not a survival strategy. Maximinus Thrax. The prime example of a soldier turned emperor. Maximinus Thrax was a giant of a man, a muscle-bound brute who went from peasant soldier to emperor purely by punching his way up the ranks. Literally, some stories claim his fist could break a horse's jaw. His reign was all about war, but his obsession with squeezing every last coin from the Senate and the rich made him wildly unpopular. Eventually, his own starving troops turned on him, chopping his head off and sending it back to Rome as a resignation letter, which the Senate gleefully accepted. Gordian I. A dinosaur of an emperor, Gordian I reluctantly took the throne at the age of 80 alongside his son, a wealthy, book-loving senator turned rebel who got dragged into ruling when his son took power. But his reign lasted a whopping 22 days before disaster struck. After his son was killed in battle, Gordian I couldn't handle the grief and promptly hung himself. Gordian II. Gordian I's son and co-emperor, Gordian II, ruled alongside his father for a grand total of 21 days, 1 day short of his father's reign, before meeting a very messy end. Leading a ragtag militia against the far superior forces of Maximinus Thrax loyalists, he was completely outmatched, cut down, and butchered in the chaos. His brutal death sent his father into immediate despair, leading to the abrupt and tragic end of this father and son imperial duo. Pupienus. Yes, that's his actual name. Emperor Pupienus was one half of the Senate's hand-picked co-emperor's ill-fated experiment. Pupienus was a seasoned general chosen to take down Maximinus Thrax, which he actually managed to do. But instead of enjoying his victory, he and his co-emperor spent most of their short reign bickering like an old married couple. Their inability to get along made it easy for the Praetorian Guard to storm the palace and stab them both to death. Balbinus. The other half of Rome's short-lived, senatorial-backed co-emperor disaster, Balbinus was a wealthy senator who was better at politics than actually ruling, finding himself facing the same fate as Pupienus, proving once again that in Rome, if the enemy doesn't get you, your own guards probably will. Gordian III. Rome's youngest ever sole emperor, Gordian III took the throne at just age 13. Unlike previous child emperors, the preteen Gordian started out under several capable advisors. However, he quickly became a mere puppet emperor, controlled by scheming generals, particularly Philip the Arab. His fate, mysterious. Some say he died in battle against the Persians. while others believed Philip had him conveniently removed. Either way, his reign proved that being young and the emperor usually mean you wouldn't be either for long. Philip the Arab. The emperor who went from humble equestrian to ruler of Rome. Philip the Arab had the honor of throwing Rome's 1000th birthday party, complete with lavish games, festivals, and likely a whole lot of gladiatorial gore. While his reign was relatively stable, his claim to power was a little sketchy, with some believing he had removed Gordian III. Eventually, he lost a civil war against his eventual successor, and was either killed in battle or straight up assassinated. Even if you throw a great birthday party, it couldn't save you from the revolving door that was Rome's emperors at this point. Decius, the emperor who thought that reviving old-school Roman virtues and values would save the empire. Decius is best known for his abhorrent persecution of Christians and trying to restore traditional Roman religious values. Unfortunately for him, the gods did not return the favor. His reign was cut short when he became the first emperor to actively be killed in combat while fighting against the barbarian Goths. Trebonianus Gallus. When it comes to drawing a good hand as the emperor, one could say Trebonianus Gallus drawed a 7 and a 2, as he inherited a plague-ridden and barbarian-infested Roman Empire. He then spent most of his reign losing battles and making bad deals. After failing to stop the Goths and agreeing to pay them off instead of fighting, he became wildly unpopular. When his eventual successor marched on Rome, Gallus's troops took one look at the situation, flipped sides, and stabbed him. Aemilian. Yet another blip on the radar among Roman emperors, Aemilian's reign lasted a mere 3 months. In an ironic twist of fate, just like his predecessor, his own troops betrayed him when his successor marched against him. Rather than fight, they switched sides and stabbed him to death near the battlefield, marking the second time in a single year that an emperor had met nearly the exact same fate. Valerian. If the 3rd century hadn't cemented itself as a terrible time to be a Roman emperor, the fate of Valerian hammered the point home. Famously known as the first Roman emperor to ever be captured alive after he suffered a disastrous defeat against Shapur I of Persia. He was taken prisoner. His humiliation lasted for years, reportedly being used as a human footstool before meeting an even worse fate, flayed, stuffed, and put on display. Talk about a heck of a war trophy. His fate remains one of the most brutal and humiliating endings of any emperor in Roman history. Gallienus. While his father was busy being used as furniture in the east, Gallienus, his co-emperor, did his best to keep the empire running. He spent his reign playing whack-a-mole with endless invasions, rebellions, and breakaway empires, attempting to keep the empire together during its worsening crisis. Despite some solid military reforms and victories, his inability to stop the empire from fracturing made him wildly unpopular. In classic Roman fashion, he was assassinated by his own officers. While certainly a better fate than being part of a Persian king's taxidermy collection, interestingly, he is attributed as the longest reigning emperor of the 3rd century, which isn't saying much. Claudius Gothicus. As his badass namesake hints, Emperor Claudius Gothicus II finally gave Rome a much-needed dub during the crisis of the 3rd century by crushing the barbarian Goths at the Battle of Naissus. His reign was short but promising, as he started stabilizing the empire before being taken out not by his enemies but by a plague. Rome lost a strong leader, but at least he died a hero, which for a 3rd century emperor is a rare achievement. Quintilis. The emperor nobody really asked for, Quintilis took the throne after his brother Gothicus' death. Unfortunately for him, the army wasn't as stoked with him, as they preferred the upstart general Aurelian instead. His reign lasted a few weeks, before he either took his own life or was once again a victim of his own troops' rage. Aurelian. If there was an MVP award for 3rd century emperors, Aurelian probably would have had it in the bag, as he basically put the empire on his back and carried it back to glory with cunning, military brilliance, and sheer willpower. Aurelian spent his reign kicking down breakaway empires and reminding everyone why Rome was still the powerhouse of the ancient world. He crushed the Palmyran Empire in the east and the Gallic Empire in the west, then turned towards fortifying the empire with massive walls across the empire to prevent future crises. Despite saving and guiding the empire successfully through the crisis of the 3rd century, his iron-fisted rule rubbed some the wrong way, leading to his assassination by disgruntled officers who falsely believed Aurelian had marked them for execution. Even Rome's greatest heroes aren't safe from a little scheming and a well-placed dagger. Tacitus. Taking the throne in his 70s, this elderly senator turned emperor tried to keep Aurelian's momentum going. But unfortunately for Tacitus, his reign only lasted about 6 months before he died. Mysteriously, probably from illness, exhaustion, or assassination because, well, it's Rome. Either way, his rule was short, forgettable, and yet another entry in the never-ending cycle of doomed emperors. Florianus. Yet another speed run of an emperor, Florianus ruled for a whopping 2-ish months before realizing that his own troops hated him more than his enemies did. He faced off against his soon-to-be successor in yet another Roman civil war. But before any real battle could happen, his own men decided they'd rather not fight and assassinated him instead. Probus. The emperor who believed in hard work, hard warfare, and a good glass of wine. Probus spent his reign kicking invaders out of Rome's borders and making soldiers build stuff when they weren't fighting, which, unsurprisingly, made him less than popular with the army. By all accounts, he was a brilliant general and reformer. He even encouraged vineyards across the empire, helping spread wine production far and wide. Unfortunately, his whole use the army as construction workers policy didn't sit well with the legions, and in true Roman fashion, they stabbed him to death. If Roman armies hate anything more than losing, it's doing chores, even if the wine was flowing. Carus. The emperor who looked like he was about to take Rome back to glory. Carus spent his short reign wrecking the Sassanid Persians and securing long-yearned victories in the east. Just when it seemed like he might be the next big thing, he mysteriously died, possibly from a freak lightning strike of all things. Other theories suggest illness or an assassination covered up as a freak lightning strike. Whatever the truth may be, his sudden death left Rome back in the hands of instability. Numerian. Following his father's shocking death, Numerian found himself as emperor while on military campaign in the east, where he developed an eye disease that left him nearly blind. So he traveled in a closed litter with his army marching home. The problem, he had actually been dead for days, and no one noticed, because his handlers kept parading him around, until eventually the stench gave it away. An ambitious Praetorian prefect used the moment to seize power, proving that in Rome, if you snooze or secretly die in your litter, you lose. Carneus. While his brother and co-emperor was busy fighting and contracting an eye disease in the east, Emperor Carneus was too busy partying hard and stirring up scandals back in Rome. From marrying and divorcing 9 different wives and promoting his drinking buddies to high office, his reign was a whirlwind of debauchery and corruption. Yet somehow, despite his chaotic lifestyle, he still managed to win battles, even scoring a major victory against a potential usurper. But what goes around comes around, and his questionable personal life caught up with him big time, as he was assassinated by a disgruntled officer whom he had cuckolded. Diocletian. Quite possibly the exact opposite of his predecessor, Emperor Diocletian closed out the dumpster fire that was the 3rd century with an iron fist, hell-bent on fixing and completely overhauling the empire. Most famously, he split rule into a tetrarchy, turning one emperor into 4. The empire was effectively divided into 2, with an Augustus and a subordinate Caesar in each half. And yes, this is going to make things a lot more confusing going forward, but bear with me. He reorganized the military, economy, and administration with ruthless efficiency. His reign was impressive, but also brutal, especially his persecution of Christians, which were perhaps the worst in Roman history. In an extremely rare move for an emperor, and the only one to do it voluntarily, Diocletian retired from his post, spending his final years growing cabbages in his palace. Because after running Rome, gardening was probably the least stressful job he could think of. Kind of quaint when you think about it, until you remember he spent a good chunk of his reign burning people alive at the stake. Maximius. The gruff, war-hearted co-emperor of Diocletian, Maximius was the kind of guy who preferred swords over speeches. While Diocletian focused on bureaucratic overhauls, Maximius was out crushing rebellions, fighting barbarians, and holding down the western half of the empire. When Diocletian retired, he begrudgingly stepped down too. But, unlike his co-emperor, he hated retirement. He unretired multiple times and tried to reclaim the throne, backstabbing fellow emperors. But, eventually, he ran out of second chances and was forced to take his own life, proving that sometimes it's just best to stay retired. Constantius Chlorus. The somewhat mild-mannered, competent emperor Constantius Chlorus was the least dramatic of the first batch of the tetrarchs. As Diocletian's hand-picked Caesar in the west, he spent most of his time beating up the Picts in Britain, stabilizing Gaul, and keeping things relatively chill compared to the chaos everywhere else in the empire. His biggest legacy, though, is most likely being the father of Constantine the Great, whom would go on to reshape Rome forever. Constantius died naturally in 306 AD. His troops, however, had other plans, immediately declaring Constantine emperor, kicking off yet another Roman power struggle. Galerius. The ambitious but brutal Caesar and later Augustus in the east, Galerius was a hardcore military guy who spent most of his reign fighting Persians, crushing usurpers, and being a massive pain towards Christians. He played a key role in Diocletian's great persecution, going all in on trying to wipe out Christianity, only later to reverse course when he was on his deathbed, helping issue the Edict of Tolerance in 311 AD. But apparently God wasn't going to let him off the hook that easy, as his demise was reportedly horrific, with sources claiming he rotted alive from a gruesome disease, possibly gangrene or some other form of bowel cancer. If true, it would be an ironic end to the man who once thought burning Christians at the stake was a good policy. In the words of Johnny Cash, sooner or later, God'll cut you down. Severus II. The forgettable tetrarch nobody really backed, Severus II, was handed the Western Roman Empire by Galerius after Constantine Chlorus' death. Unfortunately for him, nobody in Italy really liked him or listened to him, and when Maximinus rebelled, even his own Praetorian Guard flipped sides at the drop of a hat. Fleeing to Ravenna, Severus surrendered under promises of mercy, but in true Roman fashion, he was imprisoned and later executed. His reign was so short and so irrelevant that most people probably forget he was an emperor at all. Maxentius, the bitter son of the on and off retired emperor Maxentius hated not being in power and basically threw a massive tantrum when he was passed over for power, so he declared himself emperor anyway. Ruling from Rome itself, he waged war against multiple rivals, styling himself as the defender of the eternal city, though in reality he was just as power-hungry as the rest. His ultimate downfall would come when he underestimated his foe at a battle that would change the course of human history. Trying to flee back to Rome, he fell off the collapsing bridge and drowned in the Tiber River, leaving him a largely forgotten footnote in history. Constantine I. We're to begin with the man who would fundamentally change the course of history. Constantine the Great was a total game changer, who began the seismic shift of Rome and the Western world from pagan to Christian. After winning a series of civil wars, including the famous Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he became the undisputed ruler of the empire. Then, in part thanks to his victory under the sign of the cross and pressure from his wife, legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which was a wild shift from past emperors who made sport out of burning Christians alive. He also figured out why not just found a new imperial capital, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. Constantine crushed all rivals and reunited the empire. Despite not officially being baptized until his deathbed, Constantine forever changed Rome and the world, proving that in an empire full of schemers and warlords, sometimes a guy comes along who actually alters the course of history. Maximinus Daia. Maximinus Daia, or Daisa, was one of the last grasps of the Tetrarchy, who ruled with a mix of persecution, paranoia, and poor decision-making. A notorious opponent of Christianity, he backed the wrong side in the Civil War and fled in disgrace, only to die shortly after, reportedly from poison or extreme stress. Interestingly, Maximinus Daia is the last emperor to be referred to as the Pharaoh of Egypt. Licinius. Colleague and later rival of Constantine I, Licinius was the man who co-authored the Edict of Milan, helping legalize Christianity, before he eventually fell out with Constantine. After years of an uneasy alliance and an eventual civil war, he lost the final showdown with Constantine, where he surrendered and was later executed by hanging. Crispus. The eldest son of Constantine the Great, Crispus seemed destined for greatness, winning key victories against both Germanic tribes and Licinius alongside his father. A skilled general and promising heir, he had everything going for him. That is, until his stepmother, Fausta, accused him of an unknown crime, possibly adultery or treason. Whatever the truth, Constantine had him executed in 326 AD, only to later regret his decision and have Fausta killed by boiling her alive. His story remains one of Rome's greatest imperial mysteries. Was he truly guilty, or just a victim of palace intrigue? Constantine II. Constantine the Great's wish was to have his surviving sons share power following his death. However, sibling rivalries plagued this period. The second son of Constantine the Great, Constantine II, spent his reign in a never-ending juggling act of civil wars, assassinations, and religious disputes. Paranoid and ruthless, he wiped out many of his male relatives to secure power, fought off endless usurpers, and spent years forcing Arian Christianity on the empire. As the eldest surviving son, Constantine II believed he deserved more power and tried to strong-arm his younger brother Constans by invading his territory. It backfired spectacularly, and he was ambushed and killed in battle. Constans I, the youngest son of Constantine the Great, Constans I somehow managed to rule the western half of the empire longer than anyone had expected. Known for his harsh rule and unpopular decisions, he spent most of his reign fighting barbarians and squabbling with his brothers. His luck ran out when a general named Magnatus rebelled, forcing him to flee. He didn't get far as he was caught and executed. It's clear that being the son of Constantine the Great did not guarantee job security in Rome. Constantius II, the middle son of Constantine the Great, Constantius II took paranoia to a whole new level, wiping out most of his male relatives to secure the throne. I guess that trait must run in the family. His reign was a whirlwind of civil wars, including a major one against the usurper Magnatus. Religious disputes and border conflicts also plagued his reign. Just as he was gearing up for a showdown with his rebellious cousin Julian, he conveniently dropped dead from a fever. Julian the Apostate, the last pagan emperor of Rome, Julian spent most of his reign trying to undo his family's Christian legacy, earning him the nickname the Apostate. A bookish philosopher, turned surprisingly into a competent general, he won the throne after rebelling against his cousin. His reign was short but eventful, filled with religious reforms, philosophical musings, and an ill-fated Persian campaign where he was mortally wounded by a spear in battle. As legend has it, his dying words were, "Thou hast conquered, O Galilean," acknowledging the inevitable triumph of Christianity over Rome. Jovian. Jovian had the unfortunate task of following up Julian, inheriting an empire in the middle of a disastrous Persian campaign. With no good options, he signed a humiliating peace treaty, giving up Roman territory to save what was left of his army. He barely lasted 8 months before he mysteriously died in his sleep, possibly from carbon monoxide poisoning from a leaky oven, cementing his place as one of Rome's many blink-and-you-miss emperors. Valentinian I. A tough, no-nonsense soldier emperor, Valentinian spent his reign fighting off endless barbarian invasions rather successfully while ruling the Western Roman Empire with an iron fist. He was famous for his violent outbursts. He was a man who was royally always pissed off. He was a strong military leader, and though he managed to push back the barbarian invasions, his notoriously bad temper literally led to his downfall, as he dropped dead from a rage-induced stroke while yelling at barbarian envoys. Valens. Valentinian's eastern counterpart and younger brother Valens was a somewhat competent but unlucky emperor, described as utterly indistinguishable. Valens spent most of his reign dealing with Gothic barbarian migrations and Persian threats from the east. His biggest mistake? Underestimating the Goths at the Battle of Andropol, where his army was annihilated, and then he was burned alive inside of a farmhouse. His death marked the beginning of a major barbarian encroachment into Roman territory. Gratian. Taking the throne as a teenager, Gratian, the son of Valentinian, started his reign off strong, winning battles and promoting Christianity that his father so adored. But things quickly went downhill. Strangely, he had a favoritism towards soldiers of barbarian descent, and neglected the needs of many of his other men, making him wildly unpopular. Eventually, his unpopularity would lead to his demise, as a general named Maximus rebelled. As Gratian's own troops abandoned him, he fled for his life. He was caught and executed. Valentinian II. If having a teenage emperor wasn't concerning enough, how about adding a 4-year-old to the mix, as co-ruler with his older brother Gratian? Valentinian II was more of a pawn than a ruler, controlled by generals, bishops, and after Gratian's death, the ambitious Magnus Maximus. His reign, if you can even call it that, was a mess of political intrigue and religious conflict. When he finally was of age and tried to take charge, he was mysteriously found dead, either self-inflicted or by assassination. His death remains an unsolved mystery, but one thing is certain: letting a toddler run an empire was doomed from the start. Theodosius, the last great emperor to rule both the Eastern and Western Roman empires. Theodosius the Great was a devout Christian who spent his reign pacifying Gothic barbarians, winning 2 separate civil wars, and making Christianity the empire's official state religion, with the groundbreaking Nicene Creed. While he was a diligent administrator who held things together during his lifetime, his decision to officially split the empire into 2, East and West, between his sons, after his death set the stage for the West's eventual downfall. In the end, he saved Rome from immediate collapse, but unknowingly signed its long-term death sentence. Honoris. If there was an award for most useless Roman emperor, Honoris, of all people, would have the honor of being a top contender. While the Western Roman Empire crumbled around him, barbarians sacking cities, generals rebelling, provinces breaking away, the people starving, all while he mostly just hid in his palace, oblivious to the entire disaster. His reign hit the ultimate rock bottom when Rome itself was sacked in 410 AD, for the first time in nearly 800 years. A complete, utter disaster and disgrace, leaving his reign as one of the worst in Roman history. But, interestingly, he did have a pet chicken named Rome, so that's kinda neat, but it's clear he cared more about that Rome than the actual city he was supposed to be in charge of. Constantius III. A brilliant general who spent years holding the crumbling Western Empire together, he pushed back the Visigoths after their sack of Rome, all while Honoris played with his pet chicken. When Constantius III finally got to the throne, it seemed Rome finally had a competent ruler, just for him to fall ill and die 7 months into his reign. Joannes. A bureaucrat turned emperor, Joannes took the throne after Honoris' death, but there was one small problem. He wasn't part of the ruling dynasty. The Eastern Roman Empire had backed a different candidate, young Valentinian III, and Joannes was left scrambling for support. Ultimately, his luck ran out when he was captured, mutilated, and executed. Valentinian III. Taking the throne as a child, Valentinian III was put at the driver's seat of an empire quickly headed to launch itself off a cliff. During his nearly 30-year reign, Valentinian somehow managed to accomplish almost nothing, while powerful generals did all the real work, keeping the empire somewhat afloat. Valentinian spent most of his time dealing with palace intrigue, and in one moment of boldness, he had one of his top generals assassinated, only for his own bodyguards to return the favor shortly after. His reign proved that even in Rome's final days, backstabbing was still the empire's favorite pastime. Petronius Maximus. A classic case of be careful what you wish for. Petronius Maximus schemed his way to the throne after orchestrating Valentinian III's assassination, only to last a grand total of 77 days. With no real authority, and Rome on the brink of collapse, he panicked when the Vandal barbarians came a-knocking, asking for money. As he tried to flee the city, an angry mob caught him and stoned him to death. Avitus. A Gallic aristocrat turned emperor with more connections than actual power. Avitus became emperor when he backed the Visigoths, because nothing screams Rome is doing fine like needing barbarian support to rule. His short reign was marked with political instability and an empty treasury, and when the Roman Senate turned against him, he was forced to resign. Depending on the source, he either died of natural causes or was strangled to death. If it's not abundantly clear at this point, in the dying days of the empire, the emperors had about as much job security as a gladiator on a losing streak. Majorian. One of the last emperors who actually tried to save the sinking ship that was the Western Roman Empire, Majorian was a competent general and reformer who fought off barbarian invasions and attempted to restore imperial authority. Unfortunately, his ambitious plans made him unpopular with the wrong people, specifically his own power-hungry general, Ricimer, who had him arrested, deposed, and executed. At this point, it was abundantly clear that the Western Roman Empire was beyond saving, eating itself from within, as surrounding barbarians circled like vultures, waiting to fall upon the carcass of the once mighty empire. Libius Severus. A complete puppet emperor, Libius Severus was handpicked by Ricimer, the real power behind the throne, to do exactly nothing, which he did pretty perfectly. With no real support from the Senate or Eastern Roman Empire, his reign was forgettable at best. He died under mysterious circumstances, possibly poisoned by Ricimer himself. Anthemius. Backed by the Eastern Roman Empire, Anthemius fought hard to reclaim lost territories and stand up to barbarian threats, which were increasingly getting worse and worse. His biggest failure, a disastrous campaign against the Vandals, which absolutely wrecked Rome's last chance at a real comeback. His relationship with Ricimer, the usual suspect kingmaker, quickly soured, leading to a brutal civil war. Eventually, Ricimer stormed Rome, and Anthemius was hunted down and beheaded. In its final days, Rome's biggest enemy wasn't the barbarians, it was itself. Olybrius, another puppet emperor installed by, you guessed it, Ricimer, in the final crumbling days of the Western Roman Empire. Olybrius had zero power, zero ambition, and really zero impact. His reign lasted only a few months before he and Ricimer both died of natural causes, finally freeing Rome from Ricimer's endless meddling. But it was too little, too late. The empire was on life support, and Olybrius was just another placeholder as Rome's days ticked away. Glycerius. By the time Glycerius was declared emperor, the Western Roman Empire was running on its last fumes. A military officer turned once again puppet ruler, he was never recognized by Leo I, Emperor of the Eastern Empire, and was quickly overthrown by the preferred candidate, Julius Nepos. Instead of the usual execution, Glycerius got a rare retirement package, being downgraded to bishop, which sure beats being assassinated like so many of his predecessors. Julius Nepos. The man some considered the last legitimate Western Roman emperor, Julius Nepos was appointed by the Eastern Empire, but never managed to control much. Just a year into his reign, his own general, Orestes, kicked him out of Ravenna, forcing him to flee to Dalmatia, where he continued to claim the throne in exile. He spent the rest of his life as an emperor in name only, powerless and broke, until he was assassinated in 480 AD, a date that some consider the true end of the Western Roman Empire. Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, had a name dripping with irony. Romulus, like Rome's legendary founder, and Augustulus, meaning Little Augustus, after its first emperor. But unlike those titans of history, Romulus Augustus was just a teenage puppet, placed on the throne by his father, Orestes, who had kicked out Julius Nepos. His reign lasted barely a year before a Germanic warlord marched onto Italy, deposed him, and officially ended the Western Roman Empire. Rome was no longer in the hands of Romans. In a final twist, Romulus wasn't even killed. He was just quietly sent into exile, proving that in the end, Rome wasn't conquered in a blaze of glory. It just faded away, replaced by something else. A new Europe, a Christian Europe, a medieval, Dark Age Europe. And there you have it, every emperor of Rome, give or take from Augustus to Romulus Augustulus. Some left monuments, others left chaos. Some were mighty conquerors, others paranoid wrecks. A few were deified while others were assassinated before they even warmed the throne. If there's one thing this wild, bloody, often ridiculous rollercoaster of history proves, it's that ruling Rome was one of the most dangerous and unpredictable jobs in human history. Now you might have noticed that after Theodosius I, I focused solely on the emperors of the Western Roman Empire. That's because while the West collapsed in 476 AD, a date that's hotly debated, the Eastern Roman Empire, better known as the Byzantine Empire, kept the imperial ride going for nearly 1,000 more years. And trust me, that side of the story has plenty of twists, turns, and palace intrigue of its own. If you'd like to see a follow-up video covering the Byzantine emperors, let me know in the comments. And with that, our journey through Rome's chaos, glory, and downfall comes to a close. If you enjoyed this ride through history, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment on which emperor was your favorite, or the one you think got the short end of the gladius. And be sure to check out other videos on this channel for more tales of Rome and beyond. Ave, and as always, take it easy and have a great day.